In medieval Europe, rumours were not harmless whispers, but living forces that crept through villages, monasteries, and royal courts, shaping fear, faith, violence, and even law. In an age without newspapers, science, or fast communication, word of mouth became truth, and imagination filled the gaps left by ignorance. One of the most terrifying rumours was that the end of the world was near, a belief that surged repeatedly whenever famine, war, or disease struck. During the spread of the Black Death in the 14th century, many Europeans were convinced that God had abandoned humanity, and that demons walked openly among the living. People claimed to see shadowy figures at crossroads, hear voices in forests calling their names, and witness corpses rising from shallow graves. Entire towns believed the plague was caused by poisoned wells, leading to brutal massacres of innocent minorities, especially Jews, who were accused of conspiring with the devil to wipe out Christians. These rumours spread faster than the disease itself, turning neighbour against neighbour and justifying horrors that felt righteous to those gripped by fear. Another deeply unsettling rumour that haunted medieval Europe was that monsters lived just beyond the known world. Maps of the time were filled with warnings of dog-headed men, giant cannibals, and one-eyed beasts lurking at the edges of civilization. Travellers returning from distant lands were often believed without question, and exaggerated stories hardened into accepted truths. Parents terrified children with tales of forest creatures that kidnapped sinners, while preachers warned that such beings were proof of a world corrupted by sin. The belief in werewolves was particularly widespread, with rumours claiming that certain men could shed their human skin under a full moon and hunt livestock or children. Accusations of lycanthropy led to trials, torture, and executions, as communities desperately sought to destroy what they believed were walking curses. Rumours about witches were even more destructive, as fear of hidden magic seeped into daily life. Failed crops, sick animals, sudden deaths, or infertility were often blamed on secret witchcraft. It was widely believed that witches gathered at night to worship Satan, fly through the air, and feast on human flesh. A strange illness or a storm at the wrong time was enough to convince entire villages that evil women lived among them. Confessions extracted under torture were treated as undeniable proof, reinforcing the rumour that witches were everywhere, watching and waiting. These fears laid the groundwork for centuries of witch hunts that destroyed countless lives, all fueled by stories that fed on one another until doubt itself became dangerous. Religious rumours carried equal terror. Many believed that the Antichrist had already been born and was hiding in plain sight, possibly as a king, pope, or noble. Suspicion fell heavily on powerful figures, and political enemies were often accused of being agents of Satan. When Joan of Arc claimed to hear divine voices, some saw her as a holy saviour, while others whispered that she was possessed by demons. The line between miracle and heresy was terrifyingly thin, and rumours could elevate a person to sainthood or condemn them to death. Stories of bleeding statues, crying icons, and cursed relics spread rapidly, convincing believers that heaven and hell constantly intervened in human affairs. Medieval Europe was also gripped by rumours of secret societies plotting to destroy Christendom from within. The Knights Templar, once respected warrior monks, were suddenly accused of worshipping idols, performing obscene rituals, and conspiring with dark forces. These rumours, fueled by political greed and fear, were enough to justify arrests, torture, and executions. Once such stories took root, Denial only strengthened suspicion. Silence meant guilt, and survival often depended on confessing to crimes that never happened. This pattern repeated endlessly, as rumours provided simple explanations for complex problems, satisfying the human need for certainty in a chaotic world. Perhaps the most haunting rumours were those surrounding death itself. Many Europeans believed that improper burial could turn the dead into restless spirits or walking corpses. Reports of vampires emerged centuries before the term became famous, with villagers swearing that deceased relatives returned at night to drain the life from the living. Graves were opened, bodies mutilated, and hearts burned, all to stop imagined horrors. These acts were not seen as cruel but necessary, driven by a terror so real it outweighed compassion. Even dreams were feared, as people believed the dead could invade sleep to deliver warnings or curses. Rumours also controlled behaviour through fear of divine punishment. Eclipses were seen as signs of God's anger, comets as harbingers of war, and unusual animal births as proof of moral decay. A two-headed calf could send a town into panic, with people fasting, praying, or fleeing in terror. These signs were interpreted as warnings that society had strayed too far from righteousness, reinforcing obedience to religious authority and social order. Fear was not accidental. It was a powerful tool that kept communities aligned through shared dread. What made medieval rumours truly terrifying was not their content alone, but how deeply they were believed. Without scientific explanation or widespread literacy, stories became reality through repetition. Fear spread faster than truth, and once a rumour took hold, it reshaped laws, justified violence, and rewrote history. People were not foolish. They were surviving in a world where unseen forces seemed to control fate, where death arrived suddenly, and where questioning the story could cost your life. Medieval Europe lived under a constant shadow of imagined horrors, and in many ways those rumours were more powerful than any army, plague, or king, because they ruled the human mind itself. Fear in medieval Europe did not fade with familiarity. It multiplied. As generations passed, rumours evolved, growing darker and more elaborate, embedding themselves so deeply into culture that they shaped how people interpreted reality itself. One persistent rumour claimed that entire towns could fall under divine curses, rendering their inhabitants damned beyond redemption. When sudden silence fell over abandoned villages, people believed angels or demons had erased them overnight. Travellers spoke of bells ringing in empty churches and fires burning in homes with no occupants, convincing listeners that God had wiped entire communities from existence for hidden sins. These stories discouraged travel, isolated regions further, and reinforced the idea that safety existed only within strict moral obedience. Another terrifying belief was that madness could spread like a disease, not through germs, but through sight, sound, or imitation. This fear intensified during mysterious events like the dancing plague of 1518, when hundreds were said to have danced uncontrollably for days, collapsing or dying from exhaustion. Rumours claimed demons possessed their bodies, or that cursed music summoned death itself. Musicians were blamed, fiddles were destroyed, and certain rhythms were banned. People feared laughter, movement, and celebration, believing joy itself could be a gateway for evil. Even centuries later, parents warned children not to dance too wildly, lest something ancient and hungry take hold of them. Children were central to many medieval rumours, making them especially horrifying stories. Circulated that children could be stolen by supernatural beings or corrupted by evil forces beyond saving. During times of religious fervour, rumours like those surrounding the Children's Crusade claimed thousands of innocent children were chosen by God to reclaim holy lands, only to vanish enslaved or drowned by divine will. These stories reinforced the belief that God's plans were cruel, mysterious, and unstoppable. Parents lived in fear that their children might be taken by fate, demons, or even God himself, creating a culture where obedience was drilled into the young through terror rather than love. Medical rumours were equally chilling. Physicians were often suspected of killing patients intentionally, harvesting body parts, or practicing forbidden magic. Bloodletting, a common treatment, was believed by many to attract spirits who fed on suffering. Midwives were particularly feared, as rumours accused them of swapping babies with demons or offering newborns to dark forces. A child born weak or deformed was often labelled a changeling, believed to be a fairy replacement, and some infants were abandoned or killed based on nothing more than whispered suspicion. Medicine meant to heal became another source of dread. The sky itself was a canvas of terror. Rumours insisted that the heavens were watching humanity with judgment, waiting for the right moment to strike. Blood, red moons were interpreted as omens of mass death. Thunderstorms were believed to be battles between angels and demons, and lightning strikes were seen as targeted punishments rather than natural events. When churches were struck, people whispered that even holy ground was no longer safe. These fears kept people in constant anxiety, watching the sky not with wonder, but with submission. Perhaps most disturbing were rumours that evil required no invitation. Many believed demons could enter homes through mirrors, shadows, or even spoken words. Saying certain phrases aloud was feared, as it might summon something listening. Books were burned not only for heresy, but because they were rumoured to contain hidden curses that poisoned the mind. Knowledge itself became suspicious. Curiosity was dangerous. Questions were sinful, and silence was safety. In such a world, ignorance was not a weakness, but a shield. Rumours also poisoned love and relationships. Sudden romantic obsession was often blamed on love magic or curses. If someone fell ill after marriage, neighbours whispered that one partner had enchanted the other. Jealousy was framed as sorcery, and heartbreak as spiritual attack. These beliefs justified control, abuse, and punishment, all masked as protection against unseen forces. Trust eroded, replaced by constant vigilance. What makes these medieval rumours so chilling is not that they were false, but that they were logical within the world people inhabited. Life was fragile, death was everywhere, and explanations were scarce. Rumours filled the silence left by uncertainty, giving meaning to chaos, even if that meaning was terrifying. They created enemies where none existed, gods where there were questions, and horrors where there was simply the unknown. Medieval Europe did not merely fear monsters, demons, or divine wrath. It feared not knowing, and in that fear, imagination became the most powerful and dangerous force of all. The terror of medieval rumours deepened further because fear did not remain abstract. It physically reshaped daily behaviour, architecture, and even silence itself. People arranged their homes to ward off unseen threats, carving protective symbols into doorframes, hanging iron objects above beds, and whispering prayers before sleep in case something listened from the dark. Rumours insisted that night was not merely the absence of light, but a different realm altogether, where the rules of God and man weakened. Roads were believed to change after sunset, leading travellers in circles until they vanished. Bells were rung at dusk, not only to mark time, but to frighten away spirits believed to roam freely once daylight surrendered. Entire villages shut themselves indoors at night, convinced that stepping outside meant risking possession, madness, or death. Silence itself became suspicious. If a neighbour suddenly stopped speaking, rumours claimed their soul had been stolen. If someone laughed alone, it was said they were conversing with spirits. Loneliness was feared, not pitied, because isolation made one vulnerable to evil whispers. Hermits and scholars were often accused of dark dealings, simply because they lived apart from the crowd. Knowledge gained in solitude was seen as stolen from forbidden sources. The line between wisdom and witchcraft blurred until thinking differently became a threat. Rumours surrounding animals were equally terrifying. Cats, especially black ones, were believed to be witches in disguise or vessels for demons. Dogs howling at night were said to be announcing death, and livestock behaving strangely could trigger panic. A cow refusing to give milk or a horse collapsing suddenly was interpreted as a curse spreading through the land. Entire herds were slaughtered out of fear that they carried invisible corruption. Nature was not neutral, it was a messenger, and people lived in constant dread of misreading its signs. Even laughter carried danger. Rumours warned that excessive joy offended God, attracting punishment. Sudden happiness was suspected to be temptation sent by demons to lower one's guard. This belief created a culture where suffering was trusted more than comfort. Pain proved faith. Misfortune confirmed righteousness. Those who prospered too easily were watched closely, suspected of making secret pacts. Wealth itself became evidence, not of success, but of moral compromise. Mass fear reached horrifying levels during movements like the Flagellant movement, when rumours claimed that only extreme suffering could delay divine wrath. Thousands publicly whipped themselves, bleeding in the streets, convinced that pain was the only language God still understood. Spectators believed that witnessing this suffering granted protection, while refusing to participate invited doom. Rumour transformed self-harm into salvation, and compassion into suspicion. Dreams were treated as evidence in medieval life. A nightmare was not dismissed as imagination, but examined for messages from God, demons, or the dead. People were interrogated about their dreams, and recurring visions could label someone cursed or chosen. Rumours insisted that dreams could predict deaths, betrayals, or invasions. If two people reported similar dreams, panic followed, as it was believed fate had already been sealed. Sleep became dangerous, a nightly surrender of control. Rumours also erased the boundary between past and present. Ghost stories were not entertainment but warnings. It was believed that unresolved sins anchored souls to the earth, and that these spirits demanded justice. If a family suffered repeated tragedies, whispers spread that an ancestor's crime was calling for repayment. The dead were never truly gone. They were watching, judging, and sometimes punishing. This belief chained the living to the past, forcing them to carry guilt that was not their own. Perhaps the cruelest effect of medieval rumours was how they turned faith into fear. God was not only loving or just, but constantly angry, easily provoked by minor mistakes. Missing prayers, wearing improper clothing, or speaking out of turn could supposedly invite catastrophe. Rumours amplified religious authority because guidance promised safety. Questioning doctrine was framed as suicide of the soul. Fear became devotion's shadow, inseparable, and ever present. What sustained these rumours was repetition. A story heard once frightened, but a story heard everywhere became truth. Churches, marketplaces, taverns and homes echoed the same warnings until disbelief felt unnatural. Fear bonded communities as strongly as hope, sometimes more so. In a world where survival depended on unity, doubting the rumour meant risking exclusion, and exclusion meant death. Medieval Europe was not haunted because monsters existed, but because belief gave them life. Rumours fed on uncertainty, transformed coincidence into conspiracy, and turned imagination into authority. They did not merely terrify Europe, they disciplined it, controlled it, and shaped it. Long after the whispers faded, their effects remained carved into laws, traditions, and collective memory, proving that the most powerful force of the medieval world was not steel, plague, or fire, but fear shared and believed. Fear did not merely exist in medieval Europe. It was rehearsed, repeated, and inherited. Rumours were passed down like heirlooms, whispered from grandparents to children as unquestionable truths. A child learned very early which paths not to walk, which words not to say aloud, and which thoughts were safest left unspoken. Certain names were avoided entirely, believed to attract attention if uttered. Some families refused to name children after deceased relatives, fearing the dead might mistake the living for an invitation to return. Identity itself became dangerous, shaped by superstition rather than choice. Time was another source of terror. Rumours claimed that specific hours of the night were cursed, moments when prayers lost power and evil listened more closely. Midnight was feared not as symbolism, but as a literal doorway. People refused to give birth, die, or travel at certain hours if they could avoid it. If tragedy occurred at a forbidden time, it confirmed the rumour and strengthened it. Calendars were not just tools, but warning systems, dividing days into safe and unsafe moments. Even holy days could turn frightening if something went wrong, because disaster during sacred time was seen as a sign of extreme divine anger. Food and hunger fed fear as much as faith. During famines, rumours insisted that starvation was punishment for secret sins, and that somewhere someone was eating well because they had betrayed God. Bakers were accused of mixing cursed substances into bread. Strangers were suspected of cannibalism. In desperate times, whispers claimed that human flesh cured illness or protected against plague. These rumours blurred moral boundaries, making the unthinkable feel inevitable. Hunger turned imagination savage, and fear justified cruelty. Sound itself became a threat. Church bells ringing without visible cause terrified entire towns. Wind whistling through cracks was interpreted as voices. Owls, wolves, and even insects were believed to carry messages from unseen forces. If a sound repeated itself, it was no longer natural, it was intentional. People learned to listen not for comfort, but for warning. The world spoke constantly, and every noise demanded interpretation. Rumours also haunted justice. Courts relied not on evidence as we understand it, but on reputation shaped by whispers. If someone was widely feared, they were already guilty. Truth mattered less than consensus, and consensus was built on stories. A single accusation could destroy generations. Families carried stains of suspicion long after the original rumour was forgotten. Fear outlived facts. Even kindness was viewed with caution. Sudden generosity was suspected of hiding darker motives, a neighbor offering help during illness, might be accused of trying to steal the soul. Charity without explanation raised eyebrows. Trust was conditional and fragile, constantly threatened by the possibility that goodness itself was a disguise. Perhaps most chilling was the rumor that fear was necessary. Many believed that a world without fear would collapse into chaos, inviting divine destruction. Terror was seen as protection, a spiritual fence keeping humanity in line. Parents frightened children not out of cruelty, but love. Leaders ruled through dread because it was believed to work. Peace without fear seemed unnatural, even sinful. In this way, medieval rumours did more than terrify Europe. They taught it how to feel. Fear became instinctive, automatic, woven into prayer, routine, and identity. People did not simply believe the rumours, they lived inside them. And that is why these stories endured for centuries, long after the shadows that birthed them had faded, proving that the deepest horrors are not the ones that attack from the dark, but the ones we carry willingly in our minds. Fear in medieval Europe reached its most disturbing form when rumours began to explain everything. Nothing was allowed to be accidental. A stumble on the road, a dropped tool, a cracked cup, each could be interpreted as a warning. People lived under the pressure of constant meaning, where randomness did not exist. If something happened, it meant something, and usually something terrible. This way of thinking exhausted communities, but it also trapped them. Once every event was linked to invisible forces, escape from fear became impossible. Rumours also infected memory. Over time, people no longer remembered events as they truly happened, but as rumours reshaped them. A bad harvest from years ago turned into a tale of divine punishment. A simple illness became a story of possession. History itself became unreliable, rewritten by fear. Oral storytelling amplified this effect. Each retelling added new horrors, removed doubt, and sharpened blame. What began as confusion hardened into certainty. The past became proof that fear was justified. Woman bore a unique burden in this environment. Rumours painted them as spiritually weaker, more easily corrupted, and therefore more dangerous. Ordinary acts, knowing herbs, speaking confidently, living alone, were treated as threats. A woman who survived childbirth too easily or mourned too quietly was whispered about. Fear policed behaviour, enforcing obedience without laws. Even motherhood was not protection. A woman could be accused while holding her child, and the accusation alone was enough to end her life. Rumour replaced justice with instinct. Men were not spared either. Masculinity itself was tested by fear. A man who refused violence, who questioned religious frenzy, or who showed mercy was suspected of hidden corruption. Cowardice and compassion were often confused. Rumours punished hesitation, rewarding cruelty as proof of loyalty to God or community. In this way, fear trained people to betray their own instincts, turning survival into submission. Borders between lands were also borders of terror. Foreigners carried rumours with them, and were rumoured themselves. Accents, clothing, or unfamiliar customs were treated as signs of danger. Diseases, curses, and invasions were all believed to arrive from elsewhere. This turned travel into a threat and isolation into safety. Europe became a patchwork of frightened regions, each convinced that evil lived just beyond its boundaries. Rumours even shaped the body. People believed fear could change flesh, that sinners grew uglier, that the cursed bore marks, that evil reshaped faces. Birthmarks, scars, disabilities, and illnesses became evidence. Bodies were read like texts, searched for signs of guilt. This belief allowed cruelty to feel logical. Torture was justified as revealing the truth hidden in the body. Pain was not punishment alone, but investigation. Death offered no release. Rumours insisted that dying badly, without confession, suddenly or alone, trapped the soul. Families lived in fear, not just of death, but of how death arrived. People clung to rituals obsessively, terrified that one mistake would condemn both the dead and the living. Grief was interrupted by panic. Mourning became a performance meant to prove innocence rather than express loss. The most powerful rumour of all was that Fae Simone was always watching Fae. God, angels, demons, saints, the dead, eyes everywhere. Privacy was an illusion. Thoughts were dangerous. This belief created self-surveillance long before prisons or police. People punished themselves internally, policing desires, doubts, and curiosity. Fear no longer needed to be enforced from outside. It lived inside the mind. What makes medieval rumours so haunting is that they did not rely on lies alone. They relied on need. People needed explanations, order, and meaning in a world that offered little mercy. Rumours provided that, even at the cost of peace. They explained suffering, justified power, and made chaos feel intentional. Fear became preferable to uncertainty. In the end, medieval Europe was not terrorized by darkness, but by belief. Rumours filled the silence where knowledge should have been, turning imagination into authority. They taught people how to fear, who to blame, and what to obey. Long after castles crumbled and plagues faded, those patterns of fear survived, reminding us that the most enduring horrors are not the ones that attack from outside, but the ones we build, share, and choose to believe. As fear deepened, rumours began to regulate Fae thought itself Fae. People learned not only what to say or do, but what Fae not Fae to think. Certain questions were considered spiritually dangerous. Wondering why God allowed suffering, why prayers went unanswered, or why the innocent died was believed to invite punishment. Doubt was not seen as intellectual weakness, but as moral failure. A person who asked too many questions risked being labelled prideful, arrogant, or secretly corrupted. In this way, rumours acted like invisible walls inside the mind, narrowing the range of acceptable thought until obedience felt natural. Language became infected by fear. Words were believed to carry power beyond meaning. Saying the wrong phrase could attract misfortune, while speaking certain blessings incorrectly could nullify their protection. People repeated prayers obsessively, terrified of missing a word. Some refused to speak at all during moments of crisis, believing silence was safer than the risk of error. Rumours taught that the universe listened constantly, waiting for a mistake. Even the body's natural functions were wrapped in terror. Illness was rarely just illness. A fever might be interpreted as internal corruption, a cough as spiritual weakness, pain as punishment. People feared their own bodies, watching symptoms not for healing, but for signs of guilt. Healing itself could be suspicious. Recovering too quickly suggested unnatural help. Suffering proved purity. Relief required explanation. Rumours also created false patterns of safety Fae. People believed that if they followed every rule, avoided every forbidden act, and feared correctly, they would be protected. When tragedy struck anyway, It shattered not only lives but belief systems. To repair that break, rumours intensified. The rules became stricter, the fears more specific. Each disaster narrowed freedom further, tightening the grip of superstition. Children grew up rehearsing fear before they could understand reason. Nighttime stories were warnings disguised as lessons. Monsters punished disobedience. Demons watched naughty behavior. God kept records. Fear became education. By adulthood, terror felt familiar, almost comforting, because it explained the world. A world without fear felt empty, unstructured, unsafe. Rumours even altered how people imagined the future. Hope was dangerous. Expecting happiness was tempting fate. People learned to lower expectations, to brace for suffering, to see joy as temporary and suspicious. This mindset dulled rebellion and preserved control. A population that expects pain is easier to rule than one that expects justice. At their darkest, rumours convinced people that cruelty was kindness. Executions were framed as mercy for the soul. Torture was described as purification. Public punishment became communal reassurance that evil was being contained. Watching suffering was not entertainment, but relief. The fear was being transferred onto someone else. As long as another person was accused, the crowd felt safe. The final tragedy of medieval rumours was that they worked fae. They maintained order, explained chaos, and gave people a sense of control in a world where death was sudden and mercy was rare. Fear became tradition. Terror became normal. And once fear becomes normal, it no longer feels like oppression. It feels like truth. This is why medieval rumours endured for centuries. They were not just stories told in the dark. They were systems of survival, built from desperation and uncertainty. They shaped laws, faith, relationships, and identity. They turned imagination into authority and belief into chains. Europe was not merely frightened by rumours. It was organised by them. And when the whispers finally faded, when science, literacy, and reason slowly replaced superstition, the fear did not vanish. It changed shape, because once a society learns to live in fear, that lesson is never fully forgotten. Even when fear seemed complete, medieval rumours found new ways to grow, because terror feeds on familiarity. Once people became accustomed to one kind of dread, another quietly replaced it. Rumours adapted to seasons, politics, and moods, ensuring that anxiety never truly rested. In times of peace, whispers warned that peace itself was suspicious, a calm before divine punishment. In times of war, suffering was framed as deserved. There was no condition in which fear was unnecessary. It merely changed its costume. Rumours slowly erased the idea of personal innocence. People stopped believing that goodness protected them. Instead, they believed survival depended on being unnoticed. Standing out invited danger. Beauty, intelligence, talent, or leadership all attracted suspicion. To be remarkable was to be visible, and visibility was dangerous. Many learned to shrink themselves to avoid attention, to blend into the crowd. Fear rewarded invisibility and punished distinction. Communal guilt became another powerful belief. When disaster struck, it was rarely blamed on individuals alone. Rumours insisted that everyone shared responsibility. If a child died, the village had failed God. If disease spread, someone nearby had sinned. This thinking ensured constant surveillance, not by authorities, but by neighbours. Everyone became both guard and prisoner. Trust dissolved into monitoring, and community turned into mutual suspicion. Over time, rumours hollowed out joy. Celebrations were restrained, laughter softened, and music subdued. Too much happiness felt like provocation. Weddings included prayers against envy and curses. Births were accompanied by rituals to hide the child from unseen eyes. Even victories were mournful, shadowed by the expectation of loss. Fear trained people to anticipate suffering, so it hurt less when it arrived. Rumours also created emotional numbness. Constant anxiety exhausted empathy. When executions, accusations, or public punishments became common, shock faded. People learned to watch horror without reacting, because reacting felt dangerous. Compassion itself could raise suspicion. Indifference became a survival skill. In this way, fear did not only frighten Europe, it hardened it. The most disturbing transformation was how fear replaced truth entirely. Facts mattered less than feeling. If something felt dangerous, it was treated as dangerous. Evidence was unnecessary. Rumours did not need proof. They needed agreement. Once enough people believed, belief itself became reality. This mindset trained generations to obey emotion over reason, instinct over understanding. Eventually, rumours stopped being questioned at all. They became background noise like wind or rain, if ever present and unquestioned. People no longer asked where the fear came from. They only asked how to live with it. Fear became environmental, like the climate. You did not argue with it. You adapted. In the end, medieval Europe did not collapse under fear. It endured through it. That endurance, however, came at a cost. Imagination was constrained, curiosity punished, and humanity narrowed. Rumours built invisible walls around minds, long before stone walls surrounded cities. They ruled without armies, punished without swords, and survived without proof. And that is the true horror of medieval rumours. Not that people believed frightening things, but that fear became normal, inherited, and invisible. When terror becomes tradition, it no longer feels like fear at all. It feels like reality. Even when fear seemed complete, medieval rumours found new ways to grow, because terror feeds on familiarity. Once people became accustomed to one kind of dread, another quietly replaced it. Rumours adapted to seasons, politics, and moods, ensuring that anxiety never truly rested. In times of peace, whispers warned that peace itself was suspicious, a calm before divine punishment. In times of war, suffering was framed as deserved. There was no condition in which fear was unnecessary. It merely changed its costume. Rumours slowly erased the idea of personal innocence. People stopped believing that goodness protected them. Instead, they believed survival depended on being unnoticed. Standing out invited danger. Beauty, intelligence, talent, or leadership all attracted suspicion. To be remarkable was to be visible, and visibility was dangerous. Many learned to shrink themselves, to avoid attention, to blend into the crowd. Fear rewarded invisibility and punished distinction. Communal guilt became another powerful belief. When disaster struck, it was rarely blamed on individuals alone. Rumours insisted that everyone shared responsibility. If a child died, the village had failed God. If disease spread, someone nearby had sinned. This thinking ensured constant surveillance, not by authorities, but by neighbours. Everyone became both guard and prisoner. Trust dissolved into monitoring, and community turned into mutual suspicion. Over time, rumours hollowed out joy. Celebrations were restrained, laughter softened, and music subdued. Too much happiness felt like provocation. Weddings included prayers against envy and curses. Births were accompanied by rituals to hide the child from unseen eyes. Even victories were mournful, shadowed by the expectation of loss. Fear trained people to anticipate suffering, so it hurt less when it arrived. Rumours also created emotional numbness. Constant anxiety exhausted empathy. When executions, accusations, or public punishments became common, shock faded. People learned to watch horror without reacting, because reacting felt dangerous. Compassion itself could raise suspicion. Indifference became a survival skill. In this way, fear did not only frighten Europe, it hardened it. The most disturbing transformation was how fear replaced truth entirely. Facts mattered less than feeling. If something felt dangerous, it was treated as dangerous. Evidence was unnecessary. Rumours did not need proof, they needed agreement. Once enough people believed, belief itself became reality. This mindset trained generations to obey emotion over reason, instinct over understanding. Eventually, rumours stopped being questioned at all. They became background noise, like wind or rain, ever present and unquestioned. People no longer asked where the fear came from. They only asked how to live with it. Fear became environmental, like the climate. You did not argue with it, you adapted. In the end, medieval Europe did not collapse under fear. It endured through it. That endurance, however, came at a cost. Imagination was constrained, curiosity punished, and humanity narrowed. Rumours built invisible walls around minds, long before stone walls surrounded cities. They ruled without armies, punished without swords, and survived without proof. And that is the true horror of medieval rumours. Not that people believed frightening things, but that fear became normal, inherited, and invisible. When terror becomes tradition, it no longer feels like fear at all. It feels like reality. As centuries passed, fear became so deeply embedded that people no longer recognized it as something imposed. It felt natural, almost protective. Rumours taught people how to survive emotionally by expecting the worst. Hope was treated like recklessness. To imagine a better future was to challenge God's will, and challenging God invited punishment. So people learned to live small lives, measuring happiness carefully, never allowing it to grow large enough to be taken away. Fear shaped ambition, convincing many that wanting more was itself a sin. Rumours also reshaped morality. Actions were judged less by intent and more by outcome. If something bad followed, then the act must have been wrong, regardless of intention. A kind deed that preceded misfortune was reinterpreted as deception. This logic reversed ethics entirely. Goodness was not trusted, suffering was. Pain became proof of righteousness, while comfort became suspicious. This belief drained joy of its innocence and replaced it with constant self-examination. The body became a battlefield of interpretation. Every twitch, scar, and illness carried symbolic weight. Aging was feared not just for weakness, but because it was believed the soul became more visible through the body over time. Wrinkles, hunched backs, and trembling hands were sometimes read as signs of hidden corruption. Old age did not guarantee respect. It invited scrutiny. Survival itself became suspicious. Why had this person lived so long when others had died? Rumours also taught people to fear forgiveness. Mercy was dangerous because it suggested uncertainty. Punishment was safer. It restored order. A forgiven sinner left out behind, and doubt was intolerable. This made reconciliation rare and vengeance holy. Feuds lasted generations because ending them felt like tempting fate. Closure was feared more than conflict. Love was shaped by anxiety as well. Marriage was often less about companionship and more about protection. Being alone made one vulnerable to accusation. A household without witnesses was dangerous. Even affection was moderated, restrained by fear of envy, curses, or divine jealousy. People loved quietly, carefully, always aware that too much attachment invited loss. Rumours thrived because they offered certainty in a world without control. They explained why crops failed, why children died, why wars erupted, and why suffering felt random. By assigning cause, even false cause, fear made pain understandable. Chaos was terrifying, meaning even cruel meaning was comforting. In this way, rumours were not just instruments of terror, but coping mechanisms born from desperation. Over time, people stopped distinguishing between fear and faith. The two merged until obedience driven by terror felt identical to devotion driven by love. God was no longer approached with trust, but appeased with caution. Prayer became negotiation. Ritual became insurance. Spiritual life narrowed into a checklist of behaviors meant to avoid catastrophe rather than seek truth. Perhaps the most lasting damage was how rumours trained people to doubt themselves. Instincts were mistrusted. Intuition was dangerous. If something felt wrong, it might be temptation. If something felt right, it might be deception. People learned to distrust their inner voice and rely instead on external authority shaped by fear. This surrendered autonomy long before political freedom was even imagined. In this environment, rumours did not need to be enforced, they sustained themselves. Fear reproduced fear. Parents taught it to children. Communities reinforced it through ritual. Leaders benefited from it without always creating it. Terror became self-renewing, passed along not as lies, but as wisdom. And so medieval Europe lived not under constant screams, but under constant whispers. Whispers that shaped choices, relationships, beliefs, and dreams. Whispers that warned, restrained, and controlled. Long after the voices fell silent, the habits they created remained, echoing through history as a reminder that the greatest prisons are not built of stone, but of belief. Fear eventually became so ordinary that it lost its sharp edge and settled into something heavier and more enduring: resignation. People no longer panicked at every rumour. Instead, they adjusted their lives around them. This was perhaps the most effective stage of terror because it no longer required urgency. Fear that screams can be questioned, but fear that whispers becomes habit. People stopped asking whether a rumour was true and focused, instead on how to live as if it were. Life became an exercise in avoidance, avoiding attention, avoiding mistakes, avoiding difference, avoiding thought. Rumours also reshaped how people understood justice from God. Punishment was expected, not questioned. If suffering arrived, it was accepted as deserved. even when the reason was unclear. This belief discouraged resistance. Why fight injustice if injustice was believed to be divinely approved? Why demand fairness if imbalance was proof of cosmic order? In this way, fear dissolved the idea of moral protest. Endurance replaced outrage. Survival replaced dignity. Over time, imagination itself became dangerous territory. Stories were monitored, songs were softened, folk tales that once carried humour or wonder were altered into warnings. Creativity was tolerated only when it reinforced fear. Anything that inspired courage, curiosity, or independence was quietly discouraged. The mind learned to walk narrow paths, avoiding ideas that felt too large, too hopeful, or too free. Rumours also distorted memory of happiness. When people looked back on better times, they often reinterpreted them as sinful or careless. Peace was remembered not as blessing, but as negligence before punishment. This prevented nostalgia from becoming rebellion. Even the past was unsafe unless rewritten to justify fear. As generations passed, fear began to masquerade as wisdom. Elders taught caution as virtue. Silence was praised as intelligence. Obedience was framed as maturity. Those who questioned were labelled naive, reckless, or doomed. In this way, fear aged into authority. It no longer needed threats, it carried respect. Eventually, the most tragic transformation occurred. People forgot that life could be different. A world without constant dread became unimaginable. Fear was not seen as an affliction, but as reality itself. To live without fear sounded childish, arrogant, even immoral. This is how rumours completed their work, not by terrorizing Europe into collapse, but by shaping it into acceptance. And that is why medieval rumours were so powerful. They did not simply frighten people into obedience. They trained them to believe that fear was the natural state of being human. When fear becomes normal, it no longer feels like fear. It feels like truth. In the deepest layers of medieval life, fear eventually fused with identity. People did not say, "I am afraid," because fear was no longer an emotion, it was a condition. Just as hunger or cold were expected parts of existence, so was dread. Rumours reinforced the belief that to live was to endure unseen danger. Safety was temporary, fragile, and always conditional. This mindset taught people not to seek peace, but to tolerate anxiety, because anxiety meant vigilance, and vigilance meant survival. Rumours also reshaped how people understood responsibility. Misfortune was rarely external. If something went wrong, the first question was not, "What happened?" but "Who failed?" Someone had prayed incorrectly, someone had doubted, someone had offended God in secret. This belief ensured that blame was always available, even when no cause existed. It prevented collective healing, because grief immediately turned into accusation. Mourning became dangerous, as it invited scrutiny rather than sympathy. Even the concept of truth became unstable. Truth was not something discovered, it was something agreed upon. If enough people believed a rumour, denying it felt immoral. Challenge fear was to endanger others. Skepticism became selfishness. Silence became virtue. In this way, rumours enforced themselves through social pressure more effectively than any authority ever could. As fear matured, it began to reward predictability. Routine felt safe. Change felt threatening. New ideas, New tools, new customs, all carried risk. Even improvement was suspicious. If something worked too well, people feared hidden consequences. Progress was slow, not because people lacked intelligence, but because fear punished experimentation. Stability, even painful stability, felt preferable to uncertain hope. Rumours also controlled how people imagined evil. Evil was not distant or rare, it was intimate. It lived in neighbours, family members, even oneself. This belief destroyed trust at its root. Love required caution. Friendship required witnesses. Privacy was dangerous. People lived surrounded by others, yet deeply alone, never fully safe from suspicion. Perhaps the most enduring damage was how fear altered empathy. When suffering is constant and explained as deserved, compassion weakens, pain becomes background noise. People learn to step over tragedy because stopping feels risky. Helping the accused could make one accused. Mercy became selective, cautious, strategic. Humanity narrowed not from cruelty alone, but from exhaustion. Rumours also trapped people in cycles of repetition. The same fears returned every generation because they were never resolved, only endured. Without understanding, there was no closure. Each famine, each illness, each disaster reopened old wounds, reactivating ancient stories. Fear did not need creativity. It recycled itself endlessly. In the quiet moments, before sleep, during prayer, while walking alone, people carried these fears internally, even when nothing happened. The possibility of something happening was enough. Anticipation became suffering. Anxiety arrived before pain, and often outlasted it. This constant readiness drained joy before it could form. And yet within all this darkness, there was also a terrible resilience. People survived because they adapted to fear. They built lives inside it. They found meaning where they could, even if that meaning was harsh. Rumours, for all their cruelty, provided structure. They explained chaos. They answered unanswerable questions. They offered a reason, even when the reason hurt. That is the final, unsettling truth about medieval rumours. They were not simply lies imposed on helpless people. They were beliefs embraced because they made the world feel less random. Fear gave shape to suffering. It turned pain into purpose. And in a world where control was rare and death was close, that purpose, however terrifying, felt necessary. So medieval Europe lived not just under castles and crosses, but under stories. Stories whispered, repeated, inherited. Stories that warned, restrained, and ruled. Stories that taught people how to fear and how to live inside that fear, until fear itself felt like home.
Medieval rumors did not arise randomly. They were shaped by the historical conditions of Europe between roughly the 5th and 15th centuries a period marked by instability, limited scientific understanding, and overwhelming religious influence. To understand why these rumors terrified Europe so deeply, it is essential to understand how medieval society functioned. Most Europeans lived short, harsh lives. Famine was frequent, medicine was primitive, and death, especially of children, was common. When people died suddenly or crops failed without visible cause, society lacked scientific explanations. In this vacuum, belief replaced evidence. Rumors became a way to explain suffering, and once an explanation existed, fear followed naturally. The church played a central role in shaping belief. Christianity dominated medieval thought, and the world was seen as a battleground between God and Satan. This worldview made rumors about demons, ghosts, and divine punishment feel not just possible, but inevitable. If evil existed, and everyone believed it did, then unseen forces had to be responsible for disasters. Rumors aligned perfectly with theology, which gave them authority. Plagues were one of the greatest fuel sources for rumors. During outbreaks like the Black Death, entire towns died within weeks. With no understanding of bacteria, people believed the air was poisoned by sin, stars, or demons. Whispers spread that certain people caused the plague through curses or secret rituals. These rumors led directly to violence, persecution, and mass hysteria. Fear was not irrational. It was reinforced daily by death. Low literacy rates made rumors unstoppable. Most people could not read, and information traveled orally through marketplaces, churches, and taverns. Each retelling exaggerated the story. A shadow became a demon. A sick neighbor became a witch. Over time, rumors hardened into common knowledge. There was no reliable way to disprove them. Political leaders also exploited rumors. Accusations of heresy or devil worship were powerful tools to remove enemies. Groups like the Knights Templar, were destroyed largely through rumors framed as religious truth. Once fear aligned with power, rumors became deadly. Medieval people also believed the dead did not always stay dead. Improper burial, sudden death, or unfinished sins were thought to trap souls between worlds. This belief explains why ghost sightings, walking corpses, and early vampire legends spread across Europe centuries before modern horror fiction. These were not stories for entertainment. They were treated as warnings. Astronomy and nature further reinforced fear. Eclipses, comets, and unusual animal births were interpreted as signs from God. Without scientific frameworks, people believed the universe was actively judging them. When a rumor claimed the end is near, it felt reasonable because history constantly proved life could collapse overnight. Importantly, medieval rumors survived because they worked They created order in chaos. They explained the unexplainable. They gave people someone to blame. In a brutal world, certainty, even terrifying certainty, was emotionally safer than mystery. By the late Middle Ages, as education slowly expanded and science emerged, these rumors began to lose power, but they never fully disappeared. They transformed into folklore, superstition, and later, horror literature. The fear that once ruled medieval Europe did not vanish. It evolved. Understanding medieval rumors is not just about ghosts and demons. It is about how fear becomes history how belief shapes reality, and how societies without answers will always invent stories to survive the unknown. To go deeper into the history of medieval rumors, it helps to understand that Europe itself was fragmented, unstable, and constantly threatened. There was no single Europe in the modern sense, only kingdoms, duchies, bishoprics, and city-states, often at war with one another. This political fragmentation meant that rumors spread locally but repeated everywhere, taking different forms while feeding the same fears. A demon in one region became a cursed saint in another. A ghost story in a village became proof of divine anger in a city. One of the strongest historical roots of medieval rumors was the collapse of Roman knowledge in Western Europe. After the 5th century, roads decayed, cities shrank, education vanished for the majority of the population, and written records became rare outside monasteries. As practical knowledge disappeared, mythical thinking returned. People relied on tradition, memory, and authority rather than experimentation. This made society extremely vulnerable to fear-based explanations. Religion filled this gap completely. Medieval Christianity did not merely guide morality. It explained weather, disease, success, failure, life, and death. The Bible was interpreted literally by most people, and sermons often emphasized hell, demons, and punishment far more than mercy. Priests described Satan as an active presence, constantly testing humanity. This made rumors about possession, ghosts, and curses feel historically reasonable, not fantastical. Pilgrimages and crusades also played a role, as people traveled to unfamiliar lands and returned with stories, exaggeration mixed with ignorance. Strange customs became proof of evil. Foreign religions were demonized. The Crusades introduced Europeans to cultures they did not understand, and rumors framed those cultures as monstrous or cursed. These stories reinforced the idea that danger existed everywhere beyond familiar borders. Another critical factor was law and justice. Medieval courts did not rely on forensic evidence. Instead, truth was believed to be revealed through God. Ordeals, such as holding hot iron or being thrown into water, were used to determine guilt. If someone survived, God had judged them innocent. If they suffered, God had spoken. This system made rumors legally powerful. Accusation alone could destroy a life, because the accusation itself implied divine suspicion. Rumors surrounding women intensified during periods of crisis. After plagues or wars, societies looked for internal enemies. Women, especially widows, healers, and the poor, became targets. This eventually led to organized witch persecutions in the late medieval and early modern periods. Guided by texts like the Malleus Maleficarum, what began as rumors hardened into doctrine, showing how fear evolved into institutional violence. Ghost beliefs also have strong historical roots. Medieval theology struggled to explain what happened to souls after death, especially before the doctrine of purgatory was fully developed. This uncertainty created space for rumors that souls wandered the earth seeking prayers or revenge. Chronicles from monasteries recorded ghost sightings, not as fiction, but as moral warnings. These accounts gave rumors legitimacy and ensured they were preserved in history. Economics played a role as well. When money was scarce and survival fragile, envy became dangerous. Successful merchants or landowners were often suspected of immoral behavior or supernatural help. Rumors about secret pacts explained inequality in a world where social mobility was rare. Fear justified resentment. Perhaps the most important historical truth is this: medieval people were not stupid or irrational. They were responding logically to an unpredictable world with the tools they had. Rumors were information systems. They warned of danger, enforced conformity, and preserved order in many cases. Believing the rumor was safer than questioning it. As literacy expanded, science developed, and centralized states emerged after the Middle Ages, the form of rumors changed, but not the instinct behind them. Medieval Europe teaches us that when knowledge is limited and fear is constant, rumors become history itself. Medieval rumors continued to shape European history because they became embedded in institutions, not just in belief. By the 12th and 13th centuries, fear was no longer only personal or communal. It was fae-organized fae. Churches recorded supernatural events, courts acted on suspicion, and rulers used rumors to justify authority. Once fear entered official structures, it gained permanence. A rumor written into a chronicle or preached from a pulpit ceased to be a whisper and became memory. Monasteries played a crucial role in preserving and spreading these ideas. Monks recorded visions, omens, and supernatural encounters in manuscripts meant to teach moral lessons. These were not fictional tales. They were treated as historical evidence of divine intervention. When a monk wrote of a ghost demanding prayers or a demon punishing a sinner, readers accepted it as proof that the unseen world constantly interfered in human life. These texts traveled across Europe, standardizing fear. Urbanization intensified rumors further. As medieval cities grew, they brought strangers together in crowded conditions. Disease spread quickly, crime increased, and social trust weakened. In this environment, fear thrived. A single unexplained death could trigger panic. Rumors about poisoned wells, cursed markets, or invisible attackers spread rapidly through dense populations. City authorities often acted on these fears, closing gates, banning outsiders, or punishing suspected culprits without evidence. Natural disasters reinforced the belief that Europe lived under judgment. Earthquakes, floods, and failed harvests were interpreted as messages rather than events. Chronicles describe entire regions fasting and praying after storms, convinced that destruction was only the beginning. Rumors escalated quickly. What began as a flood became a sign of apocalypse. People prepared for the end of the world repeatedly throughout the Middle Ages, selling possessions, abandoning homes, and seeking forgiveness in terror. Rumors surrounding disease grew more complex over time. Illness was not only punishment, but invasion. Many believed demons entered the body through breath, wounds, or sinful thoughts. This belief shaped medical practice. Treatments focused on expelling evil rather than curing disease. Physicians were suspected of knowing forbidden knowledge, and healers who succeeded too often were feared. Medicine and magic became indistinguishable in the public mind. The concept of Fey collective sin, Fey became one of the most terrifying ideas in medieval Europe. Communities believed that one person's wrongdoing could doom everyone. This created intense internal pressure. Confession was not only personal, but political. Rumors encouraged public displays of repentance, flagellation, and denunciation. Fear maintained order by convincing people that silence was complicity. Rumors also influenced how history was remembered. Kings who lost wars were described as cursed. Dynasties that collapsed were said to be punished by God. Political failure became moral failure. This interpretation shaped chronicles for centuries, turning history into a lesson of fear rather than analysis. As medieval society approached the early modern period, rumors did not disappear. They evolved. Printing spread ideas faster, but fear adapted. Old rumors were now backed by books, sermons, and legal codes. What had once been village whispers became continent-wide beliefs. The historical weight of medieval rumors lies in their fey durability. They survived plagues, wars, reforms, and revolutions. Europe was not only built with stone and steel, but with stories born from fear, preserved by belief, and repeated